Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 24th of November 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We're going to be joined by live video Skype link by Guy Taylor, who will be giving us an update on the hearing that took place in Wales yesterday concerning John Hurst and council tax, and extremely interesting, as you will hear in due course. Well, the weather seems to be much the same across the country. Grey, few patches of sunshine, but generally a bit chilly, and autumn is certainly here. So you've got some hot stuff to start the programme. Well, Theresa May, to be precise.
Well, in fact, Jens Stoltenberg was visiting London yesterday, and as I say there, Frederick is going to be really upset because they're looking very cosy together in that picture. So apparently the Prime Minister reaffirmed the UK's unwavering support for NATO and said we will remain a cornerstone of the alliance. Stoltenberg said this is great. He said the UK is playing a leading role, meeting our commitment to spend 2% of GDP on defence. Not sure where it's going, but we're spending it. And contributing troops to irritating Russia, is what he said, more or less. I'm paraphrasing slightly.
Well, the troop numbers could do nothing less than irritate Russia,
right,
I think.
Right, like a flea. So he spoke about the importance of NATO members, all NATO members meeting the 2% commitment. And so it's just all the usual nonsense. Later on then, he met his other girlfriend. That's
Michael Fallon.
Michael Fallon, yes. And they are also the best of pals. This was a working dinner, apparently, at Lancaster House, where I think the dirty deal was done with the French.
That's absolutely correct. That's where David Cameron locked us into a 50-year partnership with our long-term allies, the French.
That's right. So Stoltenberg and Fallon had dinner there together, and they were pushing forward their commitment in the Baltic states in the face of an increasingly assertive and unpredictable Russia, apparently. Stoltenberg was with the president of Serbia yesterday as well, so they're clearly pushing into that area of Europe and keeping the pressure on. Fallon said Britain is stepping up to deal with the threats we face. The Army and RAF are providing assurance to NATO allies, with troops going to Estonia and Poland and jets being deployed to the Black Sea. Our Royal Navy is taking on people traffickers. I think what he means there is they're helping people traffickers, but anyway, I'm not sure about that. And training new Libyan forces in the Mediterranean. I think they're teaching them to traffic people too, but anyway, that's another issue. The UK is ahead of the NATO spending target, and we're ensuring the Royal Navy is growing with cutting-edge new aircraft carriers, frigates, and submarines launching over the next few years. Brian, what are these guys on?
Well, they're on something, some form of
psychotropic,
some form of psychotropic substance, because what is coming out of their mouths, either complete lies, or they're living in La La Land, as we'll see in a minute. But it's becoming increasingly evident that what they say is just completely divorced from reality. But they say it with confidence and with conviction. So presumably, we've now got a whole set of senior people, leaders, as Julia Middleton from Common Purpose would call them, in Westminster, that are simply in bunker mentality. They have no idea what's really going on around them.
Well, it's a post-truth mindset, but we'll come on to that later.
Yeah.
Anyway, just to add to that, then the Defence Growth Partnership Ministerial took place yesterday. So what's this all about? This is an announcement for refreshing defence industrial policy. Now, I think this is exactly what David Ellis has been speaking about. When they say defence industrial policy, of course, what they mean is giving all our defence industry over to somebody else. So this meeting was co-chaired by Jessie Norman, Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State to the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and Alan Cook, who's chairman of Atkins. And this is being led by the Ministry of Defence, but it's closely aligned with the work on National Industrial Strategy, which BEIS are leading apparently, and it's part of the SDSR 2015, which is the European strategic defence, isn't it?
Indeed.
Review, security review. So it's basically all a lot of nonsense, and it's all about shifting UK's defence industry, what's left of it, over to Lockheed Martin or something like that.
Well, that's the aim, of course, is to eventually move it across into the big global companies so that it's not really under any form of governmental control at all.
So that's called growth.
That's called growth. Wasn't that a picture of the new Nissan Micra we had on screen? I wasn't sure whether that was designed for urban warfare. I believe that the British Ministry of Defence would call this a tank.
Yes.
Because they're getting very excited. We've got some very soft-skin armoured vehicles that they're more or less talking about as if we were getting a new generation of tank, which of course we're not. They're going to stretch out the life of the Challenger.
Well, personally, that looks to me more like something that would be deployed in a civilian arena.
Indeed.
So is this more evidence of the merging of civilian and military police?
I would say so, but I think that vehicle is going to have some form of step if you're going to get your grandmother into it to take her around town. We're making light of this, but actually it's an extremely serious subject. Let's see just how serious it is by following through on the latest from the Plymouth Herald. And they have an exclusive report that a NATO warship has been towed back to Plymouth just 2 days after leaving Devonport with a small brackets NATO squadron. Well, this isn't a NATO warship. This is a British warship, HMS Duncan, Type 45. And as the government has been telling us repeatedly, these are super warships that can be deployed worldwide in order to deter those nasty Russians and the Chinese. Usually they can't go into warm water because they have problems. We'll come on to that. But we're pleased to say the water in Plymouth Harbour was pretty cold. So in goes HMS Duncan. And as we say below, it's reported that she was operating as part of NATO Maritime Group 1 when the, quote, unspecified technical issues occurred. What they mean by that is the engines broke down so utterly the ship had to be towed back into harbour. So unspecified technical issues mean that warship was dead in the water and therefore a sitting duck to any hostile foreign power that wanted to sink it. Well, let's follow through on this because it's quite clear the Conservative Party is simply lying over the state of Britain's military. And if we focus in on this one, we know, and UK column has reported, that there is a massive shortage, and massive shortage is the right expression, of experienced, trained Royal Navy engineering specialists to the extent that many units simply cannot function properly because they haven't got the trained people on board. We also know that the Type 45s are built of sort of separate, disparate parts from different contracts and suppliers. And this makes maintenance and operation of these ships a nightmare. It is chaotic. It is unacceptable. The government's refusing to admit it. Replacing the main engines is difficult and requires major structural intervention. This is in contrast to warships of even a few years ago, where great attention was placed to the fact that gas turbine engines in particular could be replaced very, very quickly indeed. And the Royal Navy's own engineers are unable to service main machinery because they're not allowed to touch it. The only people who can touch that machinery are the specialists from British Aerospace, BAE Systems and Rolls-Royce.
Sorry, just to clarify, that means that on operational duty, they've got to take civilian staff with them, is that correct?
Well, either they're going to take civilian staff with them or the fact that apparently these ships don't break down, so we don't need the Royal Navy to know how to do it. Of course, we've just seen an example that they do break down, so what we've got is a chaotic system where all of the original skills and specialist skills of the Royal Navy have been thrown out the window, deliberately destroyed by a series of governments, and now we're left with chaos on board. So a couple more points here. We know that the Type 45 is unable to operate in warm water, despite the fact that we've just opened a huge multi-million-pound base in Bahrain. And I think that the Ministry of Defence has just discovered the water's quite warm in Bahrain, Mike. It's surprising. Global warming, probably. We know that the Type 45s have got trouble with the bearings of the surveillance radar, and the ships are known as career death traps. And what that means is that people know, particularly if they're technical specialisations, that there are so many problems on board, no matter how well you try and do your job, you're going to lose out because there's too many problems to be able to fix them. So let's bring back in Michael Fallon here. He knows the situation. He's prepared to put British servicemen and women at risk. But of course, he's doing this while at the same time he's driving for war against Russia. He's dismantling the British Armed Forces to create the EU military force, and he is placing men and women at great risk while simply lying to the British public about what's happening. Well, we just add here that we've challenged the three main Plymouth MPs. Johnny Mercer on the left there, of course, is an ex-army man himself. But we thought it'd be interesting to see what these local Plymouth MPs have to say about the demise of the Royal Navy. Johnny Mercer has been very big on soap adverts, apparently, but hopefully he won't get into too much of a lather over the state of HMS Duncan. Oliver Colville is very, very big on hedgehogs. If you think I'm mocking him, please look that up on the internet and you'll see his campaign to protect the hedgehog. Gary Streeter, very interesting gentleman, because he said, well, first and foremost, I am a Christian, but it appears that when he is asked to stand up for his country, we're not quite sure where he is, but hopefully he'll respond to us in due course. And the saga goes on because let's have a little look at this. This was debate in Parliament where an extremely brave Labour MP, Wayne David, asked Theresa May to explain why Royal Navy ships were going to be without the Harpoon surface-to-surface missile for possibly 10 years. So we have warships at sea, Mike, but they're not actually going to have a missile system. They're going to be reduced to guns, which effectively means no offensive capability whatsoever. But Theresa May solved the problem of that pesky little question by saying she didn't recognise the problem. So the fact that British warships will not be armed is not recognised as a problem by Theresa May. She's got a similar policy on child abuse, doesn't really recognise it as a problem. While this exchange was going on, the photo's a little bit small, but if you look at Michael Fallon's face, he was screwing his face up and squirming in his seat because, of course, he knows it's absolutely true. And he's the man lying to deceive the British public from the state of affairs. But the person who sent this in to us was kind enough to point out that Theresa May also admitted during this exchange that the UK's goal is regime change in Syria. And perhaps it'd be just appropriate to bring in Guy Taylor here. Guy, we're having trouble keeping straight faces this morning as we go through this, but of course it's desperately serious. We seem to have senior members of Westminster who are either disturbed mentally in some ways, or they're on recreational drugs, or they've lost sense of reality. How do you see things at the moment?
Well, it's Monty Python and Kafkaesque, the whole lot. Everything that's going on. It's like we're living in some strange land that's back to front and upside down. Nothing seems to be as it is. Absolutely nothing. And it's falling apart at the seams, Brian.
Yeah, falling apart at the seams. But of course, we're starting to see what's going on. And the onus is on us, the wider general public, to sort this mess out. How are we going to do that? These people have got to be brought to account, and they've got to be replaced as fast as possible. Let's give a bit more evidence here as to the state of their mindset. So this is a debate in the House of Lords. Lord West of Spithead wanted to ask Her Majesty's government what intelligence assessment they conducted before making the decision to withdraw the Harpoon anti-ship missiles from the Royal Navy at the end of 2018 without replacement. And the reply came in from this gentleman, Earl Howe, Conservative. He says the Royal Navy continuously reviews the capability it requires. Inevitably, this means choices must be made on where to invest. Work is ongoing to consider options for the replacement. It's long been the established practice not to comment publicly. So we're thinking about it. We're thinking what the choices might be. It's a bit like being in Boots the chemist. You're not sure which product to buy. And if we haven't got any weapons at sea, according to this gentleman, it doesn't really matter.
No.
So we'll say la la land. Well, Lord West wasn't convinced. He went on to talk about the demise of the Navy. He says we're paying off HMS Ocean and HMS Diligence. We're paying off HMS Bulwark. We've got six destroyers of the 19 have major intercooler problems. He's talking about the Type 45s there. We haven't got a replacement for the Type 23s. And he then says this is going to mean that boys and girls, he's talking about servicemen and women, are going to be killed. To which the reply is more of the same. The noble lord paints a false picture of the Royal Navy, which for the first time in a generation is growing. I read that, Mike, and I have to admit I didn't quite know what to think because, of course, all the evidence shows that the Royal Navy is shrinking as fast as possible. We're now at a very dangerous point. So either the noble lord is in la la land or he's simply prepared to lie through his teeth about the true situation. Well, we went looking for contact so that we could ask this gentleman himself for proof that the Royal Navy was growing. We did get a telephone number in the House of Lords, but nobody was answering it. So this was the best we could do. We found this charity here, which is called Soldiering On, and they're very big at using Stringfellows and attractive totty to help survivors. Well, presumably there's going to be plenty of survivors because they're not going to be able to fight and save themselves in the first place. So I'm lost for words, really.
Yep.
Let's move on to what's been happening in the European Union, because the EU has been getting extremely hot under the collar that Russia today seems to be pushing out truth that people are picking up on. So it took Russia today to report on this, which it calls ridiculous and insane hysteria, as Russia is placed along ISIS in a new EU resolution. These are some of the comments by members of the European Commission. So we're at war with Russia. That's an interesting statement, Mike. Russia has tried to damage the EU. Russia and ISIS are toxic. Within this, RT reports a little video clip, and this is quite extraordinary because we've got the Henry Jackson Society, which has said that anybody who dares to talk to Russia today is getting involved in terrorism, and we should have them on lists.
We are all apologists. We're useful idiots. We're Putin's little helpers.
Yeah. Parliaments should amend current legislation or pass new legislation that forces politicians to declare all media appearances they make, whether they receive money or not. So it's quite obvious that the EU is in utter turmoil as truth is starting to rip it apart. So the EU says if you deal with Russia today, you're a terrorist, you're equivalent to ISIS. Well, I thought I'd probably just put this up on the screen because, Mike, it appears that we're not going to be on the EU Christmas card list this year.
No, that's okay. That's okay because we are now in the post-truth era. The post-truth era. This is according to Oxford Dictionaries. This is the international word of the year, and they've defined it as an adjective relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. So there we go. We are in the post-truth era, and the question is, well, frankly,
you don't know what to say either. We don't know what to say anymore because it's evident that we've got a dictatorship coming into force. And of course, what must you do in a dictatorship? You've got to get rid of the truth. and you've got to close down every vestige of free media. So we can see this coming in pretty quickly. But I think the EU wins the prize on this, that they are so scared of anybody else reporting that you've got to be on a hit list. So post-truth certainly exists inside British courts. And yesterday, former policeman John Hurst was in Llandrindod Wells Magistrate Court. This was to do with a council tax issue, because John is effectively saying, I'm not going to pay my council tax at the moment until questions regarding Magna Carta, lawful money, the British government's financial support of terrorism, allegiance to potentates, so we're talking about the EU and the United Nations, local authority austerity cuts, and unusable reserves are dealt with. Now, Guy, you were present yesterday, and it was pretty remarkable what took place. Give us an update.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd also say that John's also brought up reasons based on their own legislation that they're at fault with. So, you know, the whole package is there. But I went there to assist John as a Mackenzie friend, as myself and John have been doing for many years with each other. And we arrived at the appointed time at 1:30. We were clearly the last case of the day. And when we got in there, everybody else was coming out. Well, we noticed that the people that were coming out, there were two solicitors. One of the ones was the one that was prosecuting John, and another solicitor. And I immediately recognised them because the last time I'd seen them, I was cross-examining them in a Swansea Crown Court in the witness box, because they were the ones that had falsely accused me of starting a fight with them in another Welsh court, in Welshpool. And they'd had me arrested at the court hearing, and I was found guilty in my absence. And it was only when I took it to the appeal court in Swansea and cross-examined them under oath that I was acquitted of that. And these two characters, they appeared there again. So it seems like they're wheeling out these characters, and we're seeing this all over the country. They're wheeling out the same characters. They're obviously running out of criminals to support the situation. So immediately they adjourned for lunch. So we were there, and they adjourned for lunch. So there was a lot of supporters turned up, good supporters. We were aware that there was a prison van out the back of the building, obviously ready for John. And they made us sit around for another couple of hours. So we sat around for another couple of hours, and in our usual way, we were all very jovial and talking and communicating with security guards. We weren't causing any sort of trouble at all. And the next thing is, two undercover police came in. Of course, John being an ex-policeman and myself, we immediately recognised these characters. They looked like they'd been painting somewhere or something, but they walked into the court, and of course we'd been refused entry to the court, which John had brought up the fact that there was a prosecutor in there, but we weren't allowed in there for some reason. They were having a star chamber, as he was saying. So we were called in then. So we've been there for a few hours now. We were called in. John was made to stand in the glass box, which was completely unnecessary. He went into the box. They allowed me to stand at the table. And we were informed that they were unable to proceed, and the case was adjourned to Merthyr magistrates on December the 1st. So they were unable to proceed. Why were they unable to proceed? Why weren't they able to tell us they were unable to proceed earlier in the day? And it's two reasons, I believe. Is one, the paperwork that John's put into them, they're unable to address. You know, he's brought up all the issues that they're unable to explain in this post-truth era, as Mike was saying. And secondly, I think the fact that we were there and he was supported, they knew damn well that it wasn't going to be a very easy thing for them to do in the public eye. And as I say, the prison van was out the back. I mean, they were obviously expecting one thing and they got another. But what they did, by getting the police officers down there, this is starting to become their MO. You know, we were all happy and all sat in the waiting room. They get the two police officers in there to make it look like they need security for some reason. And then they call us in and they put John in the box. It's just to show their control, show who's in charge. So although things haven't gone the way we wanted them to go today, we're still in charge. So it was adjourned. So we had our photo taken outside the court when all the characters started leaving. And we went on our merry way. And this is what's going on inside the courts now. It's getting ridiculous. You know,
Go ahead.
Sorry, Guy. The comment you made there about the the public being there and the effect of the public being there. This is really important, isn't it? That whenever we hear of these types of cases, that the public do attend and do watch, because whatever shenanigans they were expecting to get away with aren't possible when the public does react in that way.
Exactly right. It's exposure. Again, it's exposure. I had a case in Nottingham Crown Court a few weeks ago when we had a Crown Court full of people. And again, there was no trouble in there. I was representing a pensioner in the Crown Court at a hearing. And the moment that the judge retired, the clerk of the court, this woman, she was like the Wicked Witch of the North. She started shouting at the public gallery, "You people have no respect for the law, do you?" Now, everyone in the public gallery, we all started looking at each other. And the funny thing was, there was half a dozen members of the public in there who weren't with us, who'd just gone in there to view. And of course, their reaction was, it's like it's a them and us situation. And so it's very, very important that the public are there witnessing these crimes that are going on in a lot of these courts. And fortunately, that didn't happen yesterday. And hopefully by the December the 1st, in Merthyr, we'll have the public there again. And as you said, Mike, it's very important the public turn up for these things. Let's see what's going on inside these courts.
Well said, Guy. The fact the public are present, watching, taking contemporaneous notes, this is all powerful stuff which the other side doesn't like. And the corruption in the courts, astonishing. And we're going to move on just a second to report about what's been happening around Robert Greene, who's also faced with so-called court action from Scotland. But before we go there, just to say, of course, that one of the things that John Hurst is pointing out is that council tax money is being misused. Schools are closing in the area. And he's also pointed out that police stations are having to close as a result of this completely false claim, there is no money. So his exposure of the fraud around the handling of public money collected through council tax, and in particular his exposure of the role of the Section 151 officers. John, I was able to speak to him briefly before we started this news programme, but he's indicated he thinks there's quite a lot of fear locally that he's hitting on some very hot topics, schools being closed, police stations being closed. Can you tell us any more about that?
Well, I mean, this is what's going on all over the country. Again, John's done some brilliant work to do with the 151 officer, etc. And we're finding the same on everything, Brian. Even to the point where people are keeping their kids out of school and putting them on holidays, and we're winning these cases. We are winning these cases when the public's supporting us and we're going there, because we all know we're being ripped off. I mean, where is this money going? I mean, in the 70s, we didn't used to pay to park in our towns. We used to, they were happy to have us there. We were paying for parking tickets. We're getting our bins delivered a month later. Every single element that is supposed to be supporting this society is falling apart, and they haven't any money. Well, where's all the money going? So, I mean, John has rightly brought this to their attention and served the notice of this on the court. And and again, if he was there by himself, they would have just pushed it to one side and dealt with him in a different way. And so it's important that people wake up very quickly, because and rightly, we're all laughing at these people at the moment, really. I mean, I've never seen so much mirth on the column in some ways, because we're all smiling. We can all see it. It's in your face.
Absolutely correct. Well, let's give another example then and bring in Robert. Here he is. Now, basically, Robert Greene was carrying on his life as normal, and then out of the blue, he gets official documentation which says he's going to get a visit from the bailiffs. They're demanding, I think the figure is £38,000 in court costs as a result of a civil court case which had been proceeding. That was in relation to a dispute between Robert and former Procurator Fiscal Eilish Angelini up there in Scotland. But in fact, that case had come to an end because essentially her side wasn't responding. They'd gone past a period to respond. They didn't reply, and months had gone past. The case was dead. But he receives documentation. But when he started to check through, he was very interested to see the documentation he received had come from the Crown Office Scotland, and this was extremely interesting, and we can show you why. So this is a letter which Robert had received back in 2014. And if we just go here and read this paragraph, you also raise a number of issues about the civil case involving you and Dame Eilish Angelini. As you will be aware, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service has responsibility for the investigation and prosecution of crime in Scotland. Civil cases are out with the scope of the work of the Crown and Procurator Fiscal Service. It would not be appropriate for me to comment on a civil case between you and another party. So in a letter, a formal letter by a senior legal person in the Crown Office, they say, whoa, we can't get involved in a civil case. We don't have authority to do that. And yet, by a very strange coincidence, a document has left the Crown Office in Scotland. It's gone to the High Court in London, and that has then triggered bailiffs saying we're going to come and try to claim £38,000. Now, we understand that, of course, this letter's been pushed back at the Crown Office in Scotland, whereupon a young lady solicitor got extremely wobbly on the telephone, particularly when she was told that she appears to be an agent for corruption within the Crown Office. Now, we will have more on this tomorrow because David Scott from Northern Exposure will be taking us through it in more detail. But Guy, this couldn't be clearer that we must have rogue elements, we will call a shadow criminal element operating in the Crown Office in Scotland as just one example.
100%. It's going through everywhere, through the whole of our society. We've got shadow courts, we've got shadow bank accounts, we've got shadow councils, we've got shadow, everything is a shadow of itself. Nothing is what it seems to be. And when you put it under scrutiny, it falls apart. And of course, before, what we were doing, we were employing lawyers to look at this stuff for us, and we would have missed that. You know, we'd have missed what you read out there in that letter. We'd have missed these essential key elements. But people are starting to get experience and knowledge on this stuff now, and put two and two together, and nothing adds up. Nothing adds up at all. And everybody is being taken to the cleaners, and everybody's got to wake up pretty quick. I mean, the big society that they were talking about a few years ago, well, the big society hopefully are waking up and realising they're being scammed.
Okay, Guy, thank you very much for that update. Stay with us if you've got time, and we'll see whether we can bring you in for some other comment.
Right, banks. This is the Financial Services Board in Basel, and they are like the regulator of regulators. And they've put out their annual report about the most dangerous banks. Which are the most dangerous banks? It's the usual suspects. Basically, 9 out of 10 of them are in London or in Wall Street. I think there's one in France, which is BNP Paribas. But we've got Bank of America, Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Barclays, Credit Suisse, Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, and so on. Now, of course, we all know that the banking system can just print money when it likes. So you may ask, why are these banks at risk? Why are they in danger? Well, because there is an intention to collapse the financial system in order to cause a particular political effect, an economic effect. So don't be surprised when it happens, basically, is the warning from the regulators.
And also, collapsing banks leaves fewer larger banks to be manipulating behind the scenes,
well, that's right. But of course, when banks collapse and people lose their money, assets can be stripped at an unprecedented rate. So we should be expecting that pretty soon. In the meantime, Brexit. UK already set to lose £16 billion from falling immigration, according to The Independent. Well, this is apparently according to the Office for Budget Responsibility, which of course is the independent statutory body, in inverted commas, set up by the government to oversee the use of government money and whatnot. And what they're saying is that there's going to be £122 billion black hole in public finances by 2020. £58 billion of it apparently is going to be directly related to Brexit. because Brexit's responsible for all our ills, as we know. And of that £122 billion, £16 billion of the black hole is going to be caused by falling numbers of foreign nationals coming to the country, because, of course, they bring lots of money with them.
Right.
So anyway, they say it's not sufficiently tight to reduce net inward migration to the desired tens of thousands, is how they're describing their predictions. So basically, they're making this figure up out of thin air based on what Theresa May might happen with immigration. And of course, this black hole, these people that are coming into the country are supposed to make up for the fact that we have an increasingly aging population, and these are supposed to be young, working age people coming into the country and providing lots of tax dollars, and that's what this means. But let's just remind ourselves that £122 billion is not really a drop in the ocean compared to what the overall debt situation in this country is. Government debt itself is £1.6 trillion. Household debt isn't far behind. And of course, the big elephant in the room is the black hole, if we're speaking about black holes. With regard to state pensions, £5 trillion. Because the state pensions, let's remember, state pensions in this country are a Ponzi scheme. You've got to have taxes being paid today in order to pay for pensioners today. And so that £5 trillion, of course, is the obligations, future obligations. But nonetheless, of course, yesterday, one of the things that Philip Hammond was talking about was to axe the triple lock, the so-called triple lock on pensions. And this, of course, is the thing which guarantees pension incomes. So that's likely to be scrapped after the next general election. The so-called triple lock, introduced in 2012, guarantees that the state pension rises each year by whichever of either by inflation or average earnings growth, whichever is the highest, or 2.5%, whichever is the highest. And that's going to end. And basically because, as I just showed in the previous graphic, we don't have the money to pay for state pensions. We've been warning about this for a long time. Of course, the reason that we're not going to have the money is because we're not bringing enough people into the country. I'm being sarcastic. I'd like to point that out.
Absolutely, but it's shocking when we think of it. We've got millions of people displaced by the wars, the genocide, which has been kick-started by the West, European Union, UK, US, USA. So we've got people moving, most of them in abject poverty, seeking somewhere for refuge. And then what have we got? We've got the whole system here geared up to make sure that everybody's going to be locked into further poverty.
Well, let's just look at what Philip Hammond actually said. We will meet our pledge to our country's pensioners through the triple lock, but as we look ahead to the next Parliament, we will need to ensure we tackle the challenges of rising longevity and fiscal sustainability. There's a whole host of things in that one statement. Not only the fact that they're going to cut pensions, not only the fact that they're going to extend the pension age to basically bring us to the point where we won't need a pension because we're going to be required to work until we die, but also this business of rising longevity, as he calls it. And the implications of that, of course, are that we're going to be killing more people in our hospitals once they get to a certain age.
We certainly are. And I'll just add to that the subject of the NHS came up in the British Constitution Group conference in Winchester on Saturday, 500 people there. But this, of course, was an extremely emotive subject. And what we are saying is that more and more information and evidence coming in that people are dying unnecessarily within the NHS. And if you look at the overall statistics, what is becoming clear is that there is, in fact, a killing program. Now, this was a very emotive subject. There was at least one individual that found this very difficult to believe. But we're saying the evidence is just overwhelming for the fact that there is this so-called care pathway in action. We know that not all of the NHS staff are aware of what's going on, and we know there are many staff doing their best to look after people. But the government-sponsored care pathway is simply to remove people who are no longer going to be paying taxes, and we're seeing linked with it the intent to strip property. So we're going to be starting to talk about this issue and to bring out evidence to show what we are talking about, But this is a deeply sinister program where we're now saying, well, if you live too old, you live too long, sorry, you're going to cause the government embarrassment. You're going to be embarrassment to the nation. We can't really pay for you. So we're going to do everything possible to help you gently slide off the planet. And of course, our very own BBC Radio 4 was reporting the other day about numbers of people who will die from dementia. But of course, dementia is not a terminal illness. So the inference is that these people will be killed off by other techniques, of which inappropriate administration of cocktails of drugs is going to be used. It's nasty stuff.
I suppose this one is one that Guy could comment on.
Well, this ties in very nicely because we've got everything going on here. We've got digital economy coming in and we've got money. But we're just going to point out that if you think your property is safe, one of the first problem areas is the land registry. We know that there are corrupt individuals inside land registry, but this is now privatization of the land registry, so you've no idea who's going to be handling the data and details of property interests. Now, as usual with the government, it's all sold as being very nice, it's all a bit of fun, it's all a bit cartoony. So here's the land registry boasting about how they're going to outsource local land charges. And this is the company it's going to go to, Kainos. And they say, we're changing the way the world lives and works. So we should be trusting them because they're going to make the world a better place and they're going to make a profit while they're doing it, Mike,
Excellent.
which is good, isn't it? Yeah. So we took a little look behind the scenes. This is one of their directors, corporate development, Brian Gannon. And I'm sure he's a very nice man, but it's interesting. You look into his background, he's got Shell, he's got big accounting firms, he's got banking interest, Standard Charter, AIB, and he's got hedge fund interest. I think it's there on the right. We could say, here's another one, Brendan Mooney. He's very interesting because he's very big on IT, of course, but we were interested to say he's got lay magistrate experience in Northern Ireland. And he's very keen on matters to do with family proceedings. And at the bottom of his LinkedIn page there, it says he cares about children, civil rights and social action. So are you dealing with an ordinary profit-making company, or are you actually dealing with something rather different? Well, I didn't get a warm feeling when I delved deeper into this company, because here they are now into the so-called charity sector, and they're boasting about how much money they've raised. Well, if we have a look into that, we get a clue maybe for what they're about, because down at the bottom here, we've got they're partnering with the UK Department of Education, and on the right, they're partnering with Apple and Google. So,
as you do.
As you do. So is this just about looking after a few records to do with land registry, or is there a social experiment going on here? I think it's the latter. Personally, I don't get a warm feeling about this at all.
You got any thoughts, Guy?
Well, the land registry has been an asset stripping device for the government for a long time. And we've, unbelievably, if you go through your land registry documents, you'll find over for the last 20 years that all these conveyancing lawyers have been doing everything by the phone, by key accounts. So they ring up, give over their key account, and properties get transferred over the phone. I mean, in my own personal case, all the application forms and the transfer forms, all the AP and the TR forms, they're all unsigned. And of course, I've still got the deeds of my properties. So since 2008, the land registry have been destroying documents as quickly as they can, because they just want the registration to be the proof of ownership. And you know, we can't have this. I mean, it's going on the same as it went on in North Cyprus when the Turks invaded in 1974, and you've got post-invasion land and pre-invasion land. And if you've got post-invasion land, it's worth about a quarter of what the pre-invasion land is, because you haven't got any title deeds to it. And I'd advise everybody to check out their land registration documents, if they've bought any property or if they've sold any property, and they'll find that these things aren't signed. The whole thing's been running as a scam for a long, long time, and I think they're trying to off it now.
State-sponsored criminal scam is what we're looking at. But future's bright in digital matters.
Yes, digital economy bill passing through Parliament at the moment. It's going to the report stage, the House of Commons on the 28th, which is in a few days' time. Well, of course, the big furore at the moment is over the pornography industry. And this is quite an interesting situation here because first of all, what they're doing is they're putting an age requirement on any website to check the age, verify the age of anybody going to a pornography website. But most of the media are pointing out here that this is probably going to bring about a database of viewing habits. So you'll have to identify yourself if you're into this kind of thing. You're going to identify yourself to use the websites involved. And you then have to, then they'll be watching what you're doing while you're using the website. So they're starting to profile people and their habits here. And they're also going to just restrict the types of content that you can view, so that online in the UK, you would only be able to view the same type of material as you would be able to view if you were purchasing a DVD and so on. Now, who's going to be behind? Who's going to police this? Well, it is the British Board of Film Control and Film Classification, BBFC, and they have signed letters of understanding with the Department for Culture, Media and Sport on this. And just read a little bit of this. This is from David. This is to David Austin, the Chief Executive of the BBFC. Dear David, I would like to thank you for the BBFC's continuous help and support in developing the government's manifesto commitment to introduce an age verification checks for online pornography. As you know, the AV clauses contained in the Digital Economy Bill have been designed to ensure that pornographic material must not normally be accessible online to users in the UK on a commercial basis without appropriate age verification checks and so on. So these letters have been agreed, and the BBFC are going to police this situation. And of course, BBFC replied to it as well. But this struck me as being, there are parallels here with APVOD, which was the Authority of Television on Demand, run by Peter Johnson. The Authority for Television on Demand have had the responsibility for policing online pornographic content in the UK. But of course, we ran into difficulties with them because they basically wrote to us and said that we would have to be regulated under them because we were putting videos on YouTube, and it was specifically our YouTube channel which was targeted, videos on YouTube which were considered too television-like. And as a result of all that furore, we stirred up a stink over that. And eventually some representatives of the UK pornographic industry contacted us because they'd had a long time speaking to this man. And what they said to us at the time was that this man has an agenda for the regulation of the whole internet. Now, I then contacted the BBFC, and I spoke to a lady called Catherine Anderson there. And I simply asked her, was Pete Johnson involved in this arrangement with the Digital Economy Bill and the BBFC? And boy, what a reaction I got. First of all, she said, no, I wouldn't want to say whether Pete Johnson was involved or not. And then she changed her tune somewhat. Then she said that Peter Johnson's not an employee of the BBFC, and indeed he isn't. That's absolutely correct. But she kept reiterating it. He's not an employee. He's not an employee. She said that his only involvement would have been if he had given evidence during the consultation. And then, rather unconvincingly, she said but that she couldn't remember whether he had given evidence or not. And frankly, there was a sense in my mind that here's someone who doth protest too much, right? So actually, one of the people that we had spoken to back when we were having our difficulties with that VOD, I was in contact with today, and his view is that Pete Johnson is going to be announced in the not too distant future as moving back to the BFC, which is he did work there previously to joining ATVOD. It sounds very like, based on the reaction of Catherine Anderson, I would say I quite likely agree that Pete Johnson is going to end up being announced as the person who's going to drive this agenda forward. And I would just remind everybody that this will not end with the pornographic industry. This will be driven out as censorship of the internet as a whole. And it's an extremely dangerous precedent.
Yeah, of course, we lose the ability to speak out in any way clear of the established corporate media, the BBC. That is freedom gone. So we've got to protect this. Guy, in a few seconds, any closing remarks you've got?
Well, I mean, we're reaching what I heard was called the Ceausescu moment, isn't it? Where everybody just laughs at them. Yeah, and I think that's where we're going, really, because, I mean, everything they're telling us is false and fake. And let's all just keep chipping away. Let's all keep chipping away. We're getting there.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. And also say, probably Guy's given us all an example today that there is a gentleman talking from his kitchen, but he knows what's going on. He's informed, he's done his research, and therefore he's able to take these people on. And this is one of the key issues. It's not enough to be there chatting to friends and family about what is happening. You have to be learning and teaching yourself and others to give them the skills necessary to dismantle this emerging dictatorship. Well, we'll end it there. Thank you very much for joining us. If you like what the UK column does, please subscribe to us or give us a donation. We can only do what we do with your help and support. And every day that goes by, we have running costs. We need those costs covered in order to stay independent and, I'll say, ATVOD free. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.